During that period, I resided in an aged dwelling constructed shortly after the war by German prisoners. This peculiar house boasted of only 2 entrances and 3 levels, yet it was built with precision. Despite being maintained in good order, the sloppiness of the communal workers meant that its present condition was far from excellent. Additionally, the house had a basement, which by modern standards was considered a luxury. The basement comprised of 18 apartments, each with its own room, and it is this particular area that we will discuss. Our basement had a peculiar feature. It would transform into an impenetrable swamp at regular intervals, emitting such foul odors that even passing by it was nauseating, let alone entering it. The utility workers' occasional interventions would temporarily alleviate the problem, but none of the residents ever spotted them. Despite this, the repairs were mysteriously done. Our basement's second attraction is its 19 rooms, excluding the corridor. However, I cannot fathom why the German construction workers decided to build an additional room at the expense of 2 adjacent ones. This room's entrance was secured with a sturdy iron door, 2 fingers thick, which had become rusty in some areas. Although it was never locked, the door would often move and slam against the walls with great force, sending shivers down my spine. It was baffling how a sealed room could have such a strong draft capable of moving such a massive door like it was made of flimsy plywood. Several neighbors attempted to investigate the source of the draft, but their courage always faltered as they approached the door. Perhaps it was the putrid odor emanating from room 19, which was so foul that the Housing and Utilities Department refused to address the sewage system's issues in that space. Alternatively, it could have been the door itself, with circular metal rivets painted white at its center and corners, whose paint always seemed to be freshly renewed. The oppressive sense of danger and fear emanating from room 19 was yet another reason why people avoided it at all costs. It was as if taking a few steps past its threshold would cause the door to slam shut with a resounding thud, never to open again. Consequently, we walked along the corridor, avoiding room 19 as if it were cursed. We had a resident alcoholic in our household, whom everyone referred to as Uncle Fedia. Despite his addiction, he was not a bitter person. Individuals like him often experience an irresistible urge to act on their impulses when intoxicated. During one such episode, Uncle Fedia decided to secure one of the doors in the basement with a massive padlock, just to be safe. He even managed to acquire a welder somewhere to reinforce the hinges on the door. To his credit, he did an excellent job, but as it turned out later, he did not possess the key to the lock. Nevertheless, we ignored this fact because no one wanted to venture inside that particular room. The tenants breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing they could now access the basement without fear. One winter Friday night, I decided to treat myself to a jar of pickles that I had saved from the summer. After opening the basement door, I descended the stairs, turning on the corridor light as I did so. However, I noticed that the light bulb began to flicker, threatening to leave me in complete darkness within a few minutes. I shuddered and quickened my pace. While passing by room 19, I heard some unidentifiable sounds emanating from outside the house. It was as if someone was moving something incredibly heavy across the floor. The sounds ceased after a few moments, but I didn't think much of it and continued on my way to the basement. Once inside, I began rummaging through the jars, hoping to find one containing tomatoes. I became so engrossed in my search that I lost track of time and only snapped out of my reverie several minutes later when I couldn't find any tomatoes and decided to settle for cucumbers instead. However, as I turned around to exit the basement and return to the common hallway, I froze. I perceived a noise, but it wasn't just a rustle. It sounded like the soft but heavy thumping of an object. It seemed as though someone had stumbled upon an obstruction in their path that wasn't there before and was now contemplating how to remove it. In that moment, I froze in place, clutching onto a jar of pickles, afraid to make a move. I was convinced that the source of the sound was none other than room 19, the same one that Uncle Fedia had sealed off only the previous day. I remained frozen in that position for what felt like an eternity, as the sounds grew increasingly louder and more intense. The banging on the door from the other side became more forceful and impatient, sending shivers down my spine. I berated myself for my lack of decisiveness. At the first sign of trouble, I should have bolted from the cellar, from the very site where the Germans had buried something that now appeared to be trying to escape, and not for the first time apparently. Amidst the sounds of the banging, there was also the unmistakable scraping noise of something clawing at the iron door in frustration. The sole hope I clung to was that the door had been secured properly by the drunken fool tasked with the job. For if that creature managed to break free, it would undoubtedly notice the lit-up basement and the presence of a human. Abruptly, the noises ceased. Had the creature conceded defeat, recognizing the futility of its efforts? Or had it simply taken a break? Regardless, I knew I wouldn't be given a second chance. Carefully placing the jar back on the shelf, I steeled myself for what would likely be the most harrowing moments of my life. Silently stepping out into the hallway, I closed the door behind me and turned towards the exit. My basement was located at the far end of the underground level, and to reach the upstairs, I would need to walk 5 meters down the corridor, turn the corner, travel another 20 meters, enter the vestibule, and climb the stairs. Unfortunately, the wretched extra basement was situated along the second 20-meter stretch, where the lighting was dim, with several bulbs having already burnt out and the remaining ones flickering weakly, threatening to go out at any moment. After tiptoeing through the first 5 meters, I paused, gathering my wits. Should I make a mad dash for the remaining 20 meters, risking making a lot of noise? Or should I instead move cautiously along the wall, ensuring minimal noise? After careful consideration, I opted for the latter approach, at least until I could rule out any imminent danger. I began walking the first few meters with some degree of confidence, even increasing my pace a little. However, as I drew within 3 meters of door 19, I heard a new sound that caused my knees to shake uncontrollably, forcing me to crouch down against the wall to avoid collapsing. After a few seconds of gathering myself, I resolved to make a break for it. Hurrying past the cursed door, sprinting up the stairs, and leaving the basement. Once outside, I immediately retrieved my phone and headed to my friend's house for the night, determined to put as much distance between myself and that basement as possible. Looking back on that incident now, it's difficult to determine which aspect frightened me the most: the sound of earth being torn up and mixed with tapping against the concrete, or the sight of the repulsive paw protruding from under the door. It was covered in green, pus-colored slime and featured 6 fingers, each ending in claws that resembled jagged nails with chewed-off tips. Several years had passed, and plans were underway to construct new buildings in our neighborhood since it was situated near the city center. Unfortunately, our house was one of the structures slated for demolition. The tenants were relocated, but before the demolition could take place, regulations required that all areas of the house, including the basement, be thoroughly checked. Reluctantly, we had to venture down into the basement. Later, we were informed that a group of 5 burly men struggled for some time to remove the lock from basement 19. They believed that there was no need to enter, as they were certain that it was empty. However, after being threatened by their superiors, 2 men were forced to enter. Apart from the foul stench, a mess of sewage, some decaying rags, and general decay, they discovered an inexplicable tunnel in the wall, which emitted a draft and a putrid odor reminiscent of a burial ground. Since the tunnel sloped downwards, they decided to fill it with a special mixture and forget about it, attributing its presence to a mistake made by the house's designers.